2 Timothy 3:16 says, all scripture is God-breathed and useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that the servant of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. Welcome back. Over the next several months, we are going to be looking at the first 11 chapters of Genesis, which are at the foundation of the Bible and Western civilization and all kinds of other things. So the Genesis 1 through 11 is obviously the first part of the book of Genesis, which is the first book of the Bible. But Genesis 1 through 11 is more than that. It is, I heard somebody say that, the early chapters of Genesis 1 through 3, even more than Genesis 1 through 11, 4 through 11, chapters 4 through 11 are significant because they sort of reaffirm what happened in Genesis 3. But Genesis 1 through 3 in particular, Genesis 1 through 11 as well, this is the bottom Jenga block in the Bible. If you pull it out, everything that follows does not make sense. You have to understand what is going on here. So I hope you join me. I am recording this as we're getting ready to start into the new academic year, which for many people, not everybody, but for many people, the end of August, the first part of September, this is more the first of the year than January 1 is the first of the year, because it represents this big shift in the way we're spending our time. So I want to start by making a case for the Bible, why this is a book that you need to take another look at. And I say another because pretty much everybody's seen one. There's 5 billion copies of the Bible in print. So it's a hard book to avoid. And not just are there copies of the Bible laying around, but it is shaped so much of our world. It has shaped so much of so many of our figures of speech. Some of the figures of speech sound like they come from the Bible, so you might recognize them that way. It's better to give than to receive, or pride goes before the fall. Those have a religious ring to them. But many do not. So, turn the world upside down, eye for an eye, put words in my mouth, kiss of death. I mean, there's just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of figures of speech that come out of the Bible. You've heard it at weddings, you've heard it at funerals. I mean, it's just out there. So my point is, when I say I want you to take another look at the Bible, is that, anybody listening to this is familiar with the Bible. It's virtually impossible for everyone alive today to not be, at least to some extent, familiar with the Bible. But many people know a whole lot more about football or finances or, organic gardening than they know about the most influential book that has ever been written. So I want to start, before we go to the actual text, Genesis 1 through 11, Genesis chapter 1 through Genesis chapter 11. Before we unpack that over the coming weeks, I want to build a bit of my case for why you need to do this. So let me just start by saying, I want you to take another look at the book because it is the book. If ever a book was the book, this book is that book. When I'm asked to describe the Bible, I occasionally will say, well, it's this collection of 66 books that was written over 1,600 years by 40 different authors in 3 different continents and in 3 different languages. But sometimes I'll go in a different direction, and I'll just say, well, the Bible is the most significant book that has ever been written. It's the best-selling book that has ever been written. It doesn't appear in the the New York Times bestseller list, but that's that's sort of because it would be in first place every single week. So again, there's 5 billion copies of the Bible in print. There's 80 million copies of the Bible were printed last year. Now, one of the reasons that the New York Times says that they don't list the Bible in the list of books is because it would be there all the time. One of the reasons is because they they divide it up by the different versions that are out there. So they'll say, well, the NIV sold this many copies, the ESV sold this many copies. And they're only looking at English. So when I say 80 million copies of the Bible were printed last year, and that's another thing, by the way, they'll say, well, a lot of those copies were given away. They weren't sold. So, okay, whatever. The New York Times is going to do whatever the New York Times wants to do. But just by way of reference, okay, the best-selling books, and I couldn't get it for 23, I couldn't even get it for 22, but when you go back and you look at the best-selling books in 2021, there were a couple books that sold 1 million copies in 2021. So the Bible, 80 million copies of the Bible were printed. So look, it's the best-selling, the most printed book of all time. It is also the most influential book of all time. And so I just think you need to take another look at it, because if you want to be a decently educated person, then I think you need to know what the best-selling book of all time is saying, and many people don't. So I'm not making the argument right now that the Bible is true. I obviously believe that it is true. But I'm just saying to people, and maybe you can share this with others, look, in order to be even passably educated today, you need to have a real working knowledge of what this book says, because it is the book that has done more to shape anything and everything than any other book. So it is also, as I read at the very beginning, it is God-breathed. It is profitable for study. So I'm excited about this new study. We're going to spend the rest of this week talking about the book, and then we're going to be in Genesis chapters 1 through 11. I hope you'll stay with me. Have a good day.